For well over a century, economics textbooks have told a simple, tidy origin story about money. Before currency existed, people bartered goods directly with each other, swapping a chicken for a sack of grain. This system was supposedly clumsy and inefficient, so humans eventually invented money to fix it. It's a clean, intuitive story. There's just one genuinely significant problem. Extensive anthropological research suggests it likely never actually happened this way at all. The barter first theory originates largely from the 18th century economist Adam Smith, who proposed in his foundational work that pure barter represented the natural, original economic starting point for human society, with money later emerging specifically to solve barter's obvious practical inefficiencies. This story became deeply embedded in mainstream economic theory and has been repeated in countless introductory economics textbooks for well over 200 years, treated essentially as established, self-evident historical fact rather than as a specific, testable claim actually requiring real supporting evidence. Here's the genuinely striking problem anthropologists studying actual traditional and historical societies have consistently, repeatedly found. They can't reliably locate a single, clear historical example of a society that organized its everyday economy primarily around pure stranger-to-stranger barter, in the specific way the traditional textbook story describes. Anthropologist Caroline Humphrey, after extensively studying documented barter systems across numerous cultures, wrote directly that no genuine, clearly documented example of a pure barter economy has ever actually been found, and that all available historical evidence instead suggests something else was consistently happening in its place. What was actually happening instead, according to extensive anthropological research, was considerably more interesting and considerably more socially embedded than simple direct barter. Small-scale traditional communities generally operated on elaborate systems of social credit and mutual obligation. If you needed something a neighbor had, you simply took it, or they freely gave it to you, with the clear, well-understood expectation that you'd reliably return the favor at some later point, in some appropriate form, when your own specific circumstances allowed it. This wasn't a formal, itemized transaction requiring precise, immediate one-for-one repayment. It was an ongoing, flexible social relationship built on accumulated mutual trust and shared long-term community membership. Anthropologist David Graeber, whose extensive research into the deep history of debt and credit substantially challenged the traditional textbook barter narrative, argued that this kind of informal social credit system, not direct barter, represented the genuine original economic foundation of most small-scale human societies throughout history. People kept a rough, informal mental account of who owed favors to whom within their community, and this system worked perfectly well specifically because everyone involved knew each other personally and expected to continue interacting regularly for years to come. So where does actual documented barter genuinely show up in the historical and anthropological record? Since it clearly does appear under certain specific circumstances, the evidence suggests it typically occurred specifically between strangers, people from different unrelated communities with no ongoing social relationship or accumulated mutual trust to reliably draw upon, when there's no meaningful expectation of a continuing future social relationship, and therefore no real basis for extending informal credit. Direct barter becomes a genuinely sensible, practical solution. You trade exactly what you specifically have for exactly what you specifically need, right there in the moment, with no lingering, unresolved social debt or obligation left hanging afterward between two parties who may well never meaningfully interact again. This specific distinction matters enormously for correctly understanding money's actual, genuine historical origins. If barter was primarily something that happened between strangers, rather than serving as the everyday internal economic mechanism within a single community, then money likely didn't emerge specifically to fix everyday barter's practical inefficiencies at all. Instead, extensive evidence increasingly suggests money emerged more directly from these same underlying credit and debt systems, providing a genuinely useful, portable, and reliably standardized way to formally track, transfer, and settle obligations, particularly once communities grew too large and too socially complex for purely informal social memory alone to reliably keep track of everyone's specific individual debts and credits. Ancient Mesopotamian economic records offer genuinely compelling, direct supporting evidence for this specific alternative interpretation. Sumerian clay tablets dating back roughly 5,000 years record detailed debt and credit transactions using standardized formal units of value, well before any physical minted coinage existed anywhere in the ancient world. These particular records don't describe barter transactions at all. They describe formal, standardized credit and debt, owed grain, owed silver by weight, owed specific labor, tracked carefully and systematically using an early, quite sophisticated form of formal written accounting. This particular reframing carries genuinely significant, far-reaching implications well beyond simply correcting one specific historical detail in isolation. If money's true origin lies fundamentally in systems of credit, debt, and accumulated social trust, rather than in solving purely practical exchange inefficiencies alone, that reframing suggests something quite different and important about what money actually fundamentally is at its very core. Not simply a neutral, purely practical medium for facilitating exchange, but a formalized, standardized social and legal technology for precisely tracking mutual obligation between people. It's genuinely worth being fair and balanced here. This specific revisionist view isn't universally, unanimously accepted by absolutely every economist and historian studying this topic. And some scholars continue to argue that limited, localized forms of barter likely did occur at least occasionally in various specific historical contexts, even if it clearly wasn't the dominant primary organizing system for most everyday internal economic activity within a given ancient community. The genuinely important, well-supported point isn't that barter literally never happened anywhere in human history at all, but rather that it wasn't the specific universal economic starting point the traditional textbook story has confidently claimed for well over 2 centuries now. It's worth directly asking why this specific barter-first myth proved so remarkably durable and persistent within mainstream economic thinking for well over 2 centuries, despite the accumulating anthropological evidence steadily working directly against it. Some historians of economic thought have argued the barter story proved genuinely attractive precisely because it fits so neatly and conveniently into a broader, considerably more individualistic narrative about human economic behavior, one portraying self-interested individual traders as the fundamental original economic unit, rather than portraying tightly interconnected communities bound together by ongoing mutual obligation as the actual genuine starting point. A story about isolated individual traders swapping goods fits considerably more naturally into later free market economic theory than a considerably messier, more socially embedded story about shared communal debt and long-term mutual trust. Modern anthropological fieldwork conducted among contemporary small-scale societies, still operating largely outside fully monetized global economies, offers additional, directly observable, supporting evidence for this same alternative picture. Researchers studying these specific communities have consistently documented informal credit and gift-based exchange systems functioning as the genuine primary everyday economic mechanism, with barter appearing only occasionally and specifically in exactly the kind of stranger-to-stranger contexts the credit-based theory would directly predict, rather than as the dominant everyday method of internal community exchange. The specific historical record of early written language itself adds one final, genuinely compelling piece of supporting evidence worth mentioning directly here. Some linguists and historians studying the actual earliest known writing systems have noted that a very substantial proportion of the very earliest surviving written records worldwide are specifically economic records, debts owed, goods stored, formal credits extended. This strongly suggests that tracking mutual obligation was among the very earliest. Most pressing practical uses ancient humans found for the entirely new technology of writing itself, well before writing was ever used extensively to record narrative stories, religious texts, or history more broadly. The next time you hear the simple, familiar textbook story about early humans directly bartering chickens for grain before eventually inventing money to fix the resulting inefficiency, it's genuinely worth remembering that this particular story, while admittedly intuitive and satisfyingly tidy, likely reflects considerably more